what would you say is the main difference that you'd expect to see in students who have had a classical education compared to those who have not?
Well, I would say it's important to observe and to recognize out of the gate that for the most part, and there are exceptions, but for the most part, modern progressive education today has failed. It's failed my generation, and it's failing students. So we have in general declining standards, declining literacy, declining numeracy, and Britain and other Western nations are falling behind countries in Asia, and even in some contexts, in students in decent schools in Africa who are still model their education on the old English prep missionary school approach. So we have a great deal of ignorance, we have a lot of confusion, we've got a loss of meaning and identity, and it's leading to a declining competency. And this is observed by many university professors when they get their first year intake of students. So one of the things that I mentioned in passing in the first question there was that a classical education actually produces mature students who are capable of understanding, critiquing, and communicating difficult and complex ideas. So, and this is for students at every level. One of the things you'll notice in a good classical Christian school is that, like any school, there are students who are really excelling, and there are some students who are maybe less gifted in some areas, but they are all aided to reach their maximum potential. That's the ideal of a classical Christian education. And the difference that I have noticed over the years, we founded Westminster Classical Christian Academy 7 years ago, and it grew very quickly in Toronto, and in Ontario now we've seen about another 6 or 7 classical Christian schools start. And one of the things you begin to see is compassionate, thoughtful people who are serious about their faith, who are creative, and who are motivated. They have high aspirations. And that's a critical aspect to education. You want people to be taught by people who love their subject, who are able to communicate that love for their subject, and who are able to mentor, if you will, our students, and to have high aspirations. One of my experiences actually of to illustrate the difference, when we were researching to plant our classical Christian school in Toronto, we went down to the United States, where there is already a sort of burgeoning classical Christian school movement, and we visited a classical Christian school in Kentucky. And we were able to sit in on some of the classes, and we went and sat in on some of the high school classes. And I sat in on one class. It was a rhetoric class. And I was, as somebody who's been involved who kind of makes my living as a public speaker over the years, I was very interested, because it would happen to be a class where the previous week they'd been reading and analyzing arguments on the life issue. So that particular week, they'd been looking at arguments for and against the pro-life view. Basically the abortion debate. And one by one, these students were asked to go up by the teacher to make a statement. Very often with some students, it was from memory of this piece that they'd read, and to analyze it and to critique it and to give their view, to critically give their view of the life issue. And I have to say, I sat there in stunned silence, listening to some of these students articulate their arguments. I thought, I've been in debates, with formal debates or semi-formal debates, where the debate conversation partner did not seem as competent to speak publicly and address issues as critically as these students. So my wife and I were just amazed, and that was one of the things that really clinched it for us, that in terms of Christian education, the pedagogy we thought needed to be recovered was the classical. It produces people who are really capable of engaging powerfully the ideas of our age, of a society, and confronting them. So it's not about sheltering children, Christian children, wrapping them up in cotton wool and sheltering them from a nasty world. It's the opposite. It's about preparing them for engagement. And that's one of the big differences I noticed straight away is instead of students very often in the public system, in these humanistic, secular government schools, being indoctrinated into progressivism, and therefore sheepish, lacking confidence in their faith, very often unable to critique the views of a secular culture. Here are students being produced who are able to engage critically, competently, confidently, with a strong grasp of the issues. So, and one of the differences that I think it produces straight away is because the approach of it to education is more than pragmatic. It's not just instrumental to getting a job or finding a way to make money. It produces people who are lifelong learners, who actually have a love of learning and then are able to engage with a multiplicity of subjects. And of course, then have diverse employment opportunities going forward. So it's thinking about, it produces students who love education for its own sake, who love their subjects for their own sake. And of course, that ultimately is also very impressive to employers. Those are some of the key differences that I've noticed over the past 7 or 8 years in the emergence of these classical Christian schools in Canada, the kind of students that are steadily being produced, and what I've observed in the United States over the years as well, in the movements that have developed there.